What's up, fellow internet denizens? Legend tells of a monster as big as a fishing boat with a mouth wide enough to envelop you and rows upon rows of hairy fingernails instead of teeth, though sometimes they have fangs the shape and size of blades. Their tails are strong enough to smack a hole in your prow, and they're known to explode if they come onto land. Sometimes they fight krakens and win. I'm talking, of course, about whales. Sure, they're not scary to me, as I grew up by the sea in the 21st century and have taken classes in marine biology. However, to a peasant in Anatolia during the Byzantine Empire, they're rather alien. Think about it. Nobody back then went diving with proper equipment, and only fishermen and sailors would really encounter them. The average citizen back then had only heard fairy tales about monsters that ate prophets and threatened faraway princesses. Now, what if I told you that one of these cetaceans disrupted an entire empire with his antics?
Signed, yours truly, the whale.
Before we discuss our main character, let's set the scene. The ancient Greeks were no strangers to whales. While we derive our word cetacean from their word ketos, that does not necessarily mean that ketos meant whale. In my video on European dragons, I mentioned that ketoi were their own type of sea dragon, and we can see them painted on amphoras and so on, notably looking nothing like whales. One of these sea dragons was known for being sent by Poseidon to devour the Ethiopian princess Andromeda, and was ultimately slain by Perseus. Now, I do think that these ketoi were at least somewhat based on whales. Whales were common at the time in the Mediterranean, common enough that Herodotus blamed them for destroying Darius's fleet near Athos. Maybe a fisherman once saw a big hairy maw in the water, and that spooled into the story of Charybdis. I've seen blue and humpback whales swim, and when they don't show their fins or breach, they do strike me as kind of slimy and serpentine. Now, in ancient Greek, ketos was used to refer not only to giant sea monsters, but any large sea creature in general, such as seal in Homer's Odyssey, notably. The word felina was used for whales in particular. Felina is actually where we get the word baleen from. So all felini are ketoi, but not all ketoi are felini. Got it? Good. Now, in the early Byzantine Empire, there was one very bad felina, comparable only to the ketos, who was sent by Poseidon to besiege Ethiopia. Let's talk about Porphyrios. It's the 6th century, and you are the Emperor Justinian. Your efforts to recapture the former glory of Rome are being impeded by several natural disasters. The Nile has just experienced a devastating flood so bad that recently planted seeds are rotting in stagnant water. A series of nasty earthquakes has stricken Anatolia and Lebanon. To the north, the Slavs have crossed the river Ister and have begun killing and enslaving everyone in sight. You haven't slept in days, and you are frantically trying to keep your empire together. Your wife, Theodora, has just left the throne room to get ready for bed. She calls to you, concerned about your lack of sleep, and you tell her that you'll be there in an hour or so. Then, a messenger runs in, knocking over a flower pot as he enters. "My liege," he says, panting, "the whale! He's back." And as you feel the blood rush to your head, all you can say, as your eyes dart between the messenger and your shattered petunia pot, is, "Oh no, not again." Justinian's reign was far from fun, as you can see. For about 50 years in the 6th century, a whale terrorized the Sea of Marmara. The Sea of Marmara, for those who don't know, is the channel that leads from the Mediterranean into the Black Sea between two narrow straits, one of these being the Bosporus. The locals named this whale Porphyrios. He would sink several ships in a fleet, and the remaining ships would scatter, delaying trade and outright canceling it in some cases. And the worst part is, this was on and off. Porphyrios would disappear for a long time, and just when everyone thought it was safe, he would reappear, sink more ships, destroy more product, and scatter the survivors hither and yon. The thing is, if he had parked himself anywhere else, Porphyrios would not be as big of a threat. By setting up shop in the Sea of Marmara, he effectively split the Byzantine Empire just as Justinian was trying to reconquer Western Rome. This became such a problem that Justinian declared the capture and execution of Porphyrios to be a top priority. However, the hapless emperor was unable to devise any plan that could aid in his capture, though it's likely that this was because he was preoccupied with every other disaster that was happening in his empire. Fortunately, a little while after the Nile's massive flood, Porphyrios was caught. One One particularly sunny day, he was chasing a pod of dolphins close to the mouth of what is now known as the Sakarya River. At first, Porphyrios was successful, catching and eating a couple of dolphins. However, he got greedy. He continued his chase, not noticing just how close he was getting to the shore, until he beached himself on a sandbar. He struggled, but only got himself more stuck. Then, everyone who lived nearby came out and started beating the pulp out of him and chopping at him with axes, but this didn't kill him. They then tied him to a wagon and dragged him around until he died, and then people started tearing him apart with their hands and either eating him right there or saving parts of him to be cured and eaten later. Move over, exploding whale of Florence, Oregon. There is an even more utterly insane way for a whale to die. In the history of the wars, Procopius writes that some locals at the time remained skeptical about whether or not the whale that the citizens captured was Porphyrios. He doesn't state why, though, and that makes me a little mad. He just goes back to talking about the Nile flood as if the world's most disruptive whale was nothing more than a footnote. He also barely describes Porphyrios' appearance apart from size. So, now that you know the story, you're probably wondering, what kind of whale does this? That, my friends, is why I made this video. I wanted to know who Porphyrios was, and I think I've come to a conclusion. We all know what a whale is, right? They're big, blubbery sea mammals that are highly intelligent and love to sing. In most scientific definitions, whales are bigger than dolphins, but some whales are actually more closely related to dolphins than others, and some whales are actually smaller than some dolphins. It's kind of tangly. Some whales eat krill using keratinous filters called baleen, while some eat fish and squids using their teeth. We know that Porphyrios ate dolphins, so he is most likely the latter type of cetacean, as someone with a mouth equipped for krill would not be able to eat a dolphin. I think our next clue as to who he was would probably be his name. Porphyrios comes from the Greek word for purple. There are a couple of reasons he would be named this. The first would be that he was named after Porphyrion, the giant son of Gaia who led a coalition of other giants to attack Mount Olympus. I'd say this is rather poetic, but it says nothing about who Porphyrios was, other than that he was a nuisance. The other reason could be due to his color. Now, there are no purple whales. Most are some shade of dark blue to gray. However, color words and the meanings ascribed to them change depending on the language you are speaking at the time that you are speaking it. For example, Russian has two words for blue, which they can tell apart just as easily as English speakers can tell orange from red. According to this nifty little chart from Kiwi Hellenist, we can tell that Porphyrios, the color, can be anywhere from dark indigo to light magenta. Based on context, we are probably looking for a whale that is along the lines of dark indigo, though this could vary based on whether or not someone saw him through water, as water often seems to turn everything in it various shades of blue. That doesn't narrow it down a whole lot, but we're starting to get a mental picture. Porphyrios was a darker colored whale with teeth instead of baleens. Now, if you're like me and regularly keep up to date with every piece of whale news you can find, you will probably think that Porphyrios' story sounds familiar. In fact, something like this is happening right now in Gibraltar, though with less casualties. You see, a pod of orcas led by a cow named White Gladys has been attacking yachts in the Strait of Gibraltar since mid-2020. A lot of people believe that Porphyrios could have either been one orca or possibly a pod of them. One of the reasons people believe that White Gladys began her attacks was possibly due to pregnancy-related stress, which led her other children to imitate her, and then her new child to imitate their siblings. I am not inclined to believe that Porphyrios was a pod, seeing as this region is so hard to navigate if you're big, and a pod consists of a lot of big orcas. Whether or not he was alone, though, Porphyrios was probably very stressed. He was a large sea animal in a weird, complicated place with a different oxygen content than he was used to, and he likely lashed out because of this. Now, orcas, otherwise known as killer whales, despite not being whales, are known to chase and eat dolphins. Orcas are black, but can appear as a darker blue when underwater. Does this mean we found our man? Not necessarily. First off, orcas are not very common in the Eastern Mediterranean, but that does not mean they weren't in the past. After all, no one really tagged orcas back then. Also, Procopius described the whale as around 45 feet long and 15 feet wide in today's units. On the one hand, the maximum length of the average male orca is around 26 feet, or slightly slightly more than half of Porphyrios' alleged length. On the other, this could have been an ancient instance of the fish was this big. After all, Procopius was known to have some biases, especially regarding current events and his employers. Let's suppose that Porphyrios was 45 feet long, and this wasn't just an exaggeration made either by Procopius or a local fisherman. The only species of toothed whale in the Mediterranean that is around that long is a sperm whale. Sperm whales are the kind of whale that you think of when you hear Moby Dick. They're big, boxy, terrifying, and dark gray, but they look kind of grayish indigo when underwater. However, these are exceptionally rare in shallow waters, and being even more massive than an orca, they're even less likely to get stuck in the Sea of Marmara. Furthermore, sperm whales are not known to eat dolphins, opting instead to eat squid and fish. If a sperm whale did get stuck in here though, maybe he would be desperate and eat whatever he found, and also get stressed and attack ships. After all, the Sea of Marmara has a prominent porpoise population, so if there aren't any squids, these little torpedo-looking fellas might start looking like dinner. Now that we've gone over the two main theories, what do I think? I am in the first camp. I initially came in thinking that he was a lone sperm whale, but something didn't quite add up as I researched this. Why would he disappear every so often, sometimes for years at a time? You would think that something so big, stuck in a place that's so hard to navigate, would kind of become a permanent fixture. Why would a sperm whale be in shallow waters that don't have the right oxygen content to support their favorite prey? I have therefore come to the conclusion that Porphyrios was a series of orcas that got stuck in the Sea of Marmara when chasing some dolphins, and then, separated from their pod and stuck in a new environment, they began to lash out, fighting these giant wooden fish that got in their way. After a while, each Porphyrios would find their way out, explaining the hiatuses. Then, another one would find their way back in, following some dolphins, and then repeat the cycle over and over again. The people who killed the final Porphyrios probably exaggerated the size, as a lot of fishermen do, and then Procopius might have exaggerated it further. Why did the attacks stop once this Porphyrios was slain? Well, that's the thing. I don't think they did. After all, there were several people at the time who believed that he was still out there. Maybe the citizens thought that the Porphyrios that beached himself was in fact their Porphyrios and then moved on satisfied, but ultimately, I think it was just a fluke. Had Procopius given us more detail instead of just moving on and talking about floods, maybe we'd have a more concrete answer and I would not be inclined to make this video. I think that the other conclusion that I've come to here is that early medieval court historians are annoyingly vague about the stuff that really matters to me. What do you guys think though? Was Porphyrios an orca or a sperm whale? Or was he really a Ketos sent by Poseidon to punish the Eastern Roman Empire for turning their backs on him? Who knows? I've been Alien Daydreamer, and I am out. Bye!